control, physical, financial, or sexual abuse of one partner by the other. And just to clarify, this is a violence that is often perpetrated by males and endured by female partners when in heterosexual unions. And for this reason, in Belize and elsewhere in the United States as well, and in many other places, most of the treatment services cater to women. But just to be clear, of course, there are many cisgender males that are victims of intimate partner violence. Transgender individuals, same-sex relationships can experience intimate partner violence. But the type of intimate partner violence that I have primarily investigated is the cisgender male-female violence in gender-based violence in heterosexual unions. So in Belize, prior to the onset of my research, the previous data that I could gather, the most widespread survey that had been done was by the Belize Organization for Women in Development. In 1998, they had conducted a survey with 184 individuals and found a near 50% prevalence rate. But this was focused on the Belize district, and I was actually working in Cayo, and I'll tell you how I got there in just a minute. But the women's department at the time was indicating that per capita, more incidents were getting reported in Cayo than in any other district. So it raised the question, is there actually more violence occurring in Cayo? Why is the reporting higher? How pervasive is intimate partner violence in Cayo? In what ways is this affecting people's daily experience? What steps have been made to overcome it, and what steps are yet to be overcome, are yet to occur to help us overcome? So a little bit about how I got into my work. Initially, I went to Belize in 2002 to work for the Belize Valley Archaeological Reconnaissance Project. I began with that archaeological work, and it was fascinating, phenomenal. But over the course of time working with that project, I got to know a lot of people around the community. And as things often do, due to that ethnographic serendipity, when you're in a place, the problems or the culturally salient issues, over time, they begin to emerge. And a close friend that I had formed in the community, one day, I was just talking to her. We talked about everything in our lives, and I saw a big bruise on her arm, and we were so close. I had known her for some time, and I did ask her about it, and I said, I don't mean to pry, but are you okay? What happened? And she had explained to me that her husband had been upset because she was talking to the neighbor, and they were talking about an upcoming political election. And he was upset that she had been talking to him too long, and he wanted her to stop, to come back home. And he actually came and he grabbed her and he threw her against their house. And that was alarming, but what was even more surprising and eye-opening to me was after that, how she said to me something to the effect of, it just because he loved me. If beat me, love me. And please forgive my Creole. I know my pronunciation is terrible, but that idea of how she was conflating love and violence was really eye-opening to me. In other words, the opposite of love not being hate, but the opposite of love being indifference. As long as someone cared enough for you to monitor you, to be concerned about what you were doing and what you were, how you were conducting yourself, who you were talking to, then that was a sign of them caring for you. It just really made me feel that I wanted to inquire further into understanding what violence meant in Cayo. And so I switched to cultural anthropology in 2005 and started working with Cornerstone Foundation as a volunteer. And at that time started running gender equality focus groups or facilitating focus groups, just trying to learn much more about gender and its constraints and its various things related to gender in Belize. And then in 2007, I started a dissertation feasibility study. I was kind of honing in on focusing on the particular issue that would become my dissertation research, which was specifically on intimate partner violence. So from 2007 2008 to 2009, I resided in Cayo. And uh, previously, as I had worked with Cornerstone Foundation, I had gotten to know a few volunteers there. And very serendipitously, they had just opened Mary Open Doors in 2008, which was the country's second shelter for intimate partner violence victims. And so I was able to learn so much from helping them on the front lines of the shelter in its very early days. And alongside that, it kind of formed, as my fellow panelists were talking about, a mutually symbiotic relationship with Mary Open Doors, where I was going out and I was conducting research to learn more about intimate partner violence, its prevalence in the community, the contributing factors, the ways that it was being handled within the system. And during this time, I carried out 623 survey questionnaires. These were done with convenience sampling, basically going out, meet, whomever I would meet on the street or in public spaces, and inviting them to participate in a survey. And it took a very long time, and certainly not everybody wanted to, but there were a lot of people who did. And then some of those surveys led to more in-depth interviews. I ended up doing 40 in-depth interviews, semi-structured interviews with survivors, self-identified reforms perpetrators, police officers, medical practitioners, religious practitioners, educators, counselors, judges, any people that dealt with this in all sorts of areas, and focus groups. So I mentioned again my fellow panelists earlier calling the focus groups, and how this is a way that I redirected. Initially, I had this idea to go in to do these focus groups. I thought that would be a useful strategy for people to gather to talk about how they felt the medical system was handling domestic violence, or how they felt the policies were being enforced. But those groups ended up kind of organically turning into support groups, where, yes, of course, the participants all knew each other. It was a small community, and it developed into this support group that just kept meeting again and again, and ended up providing economic assistance to women leaving abusive relationships who were having trouble obtaining economic means to support themselves, because they had left, their partner had been the breadwinner. And so these groups are still meeting today. They've changed their name to Women Empowering Each Other, but it's just fascinating to get to witness that and be part of that. And then since then, I've done several follow-up studies, but today I just wanted to quickly summarize what some of my findings were from this culmination of research. So I gathered both quantitative and qualitative findings. So quantitatively, of the 623 people that I conducted the survey with, 564 of them were non-single, and by that I mean they were in a common law relationship. They were formally married in a religious union. They might have said boyfriend, girlfriend, but they had a partner of some sort. And of those relationships, 70% were experiencing at least one of these 5 types of intimate partner violence. So 41% financial. The behaviors that I assessed were things along the lines of preventing a partner from working, maybe withholding money or access to medication. Psychological violence pertained to things like demonstrating extreme jealousy, isolation, destruction of property. Verbal abuse could have been yelling, shaming, threatening. Sexual abuse, forcing sexual activity. Physical abuse, pushing, restricting, burning, assaulting with a weapon. And again, referencing my fellow panelists, I noticed Dr. Flores mentioned how the physical violence was most often construed as the type of violence that was the only real type of violence. These other types don't pertain, but some people definitely saw it that way, that only certain types were, some types were okay, but some types were not acceptable, were less okay. So qualitatively, I think this is where, as an anthropologist, again, fellow earlier presenters today were mentioning, what I think that my research hopefully can provide a bit of insight into is the qualitative especially. So it's been normalized, as fellow people have mentioned today, that it's been normalized due to cultural influences. A lot of refrains that I would kind of keep hearing throughout my research, things like, if you know beat me, you know love me, you make your bed hard, you kind of put yourself in this position, you deserve what's going to happen to you, between men and women, you don't interfere, it's just, you don't want to make yourself become the target because they're going to be sweet up tomorrow and then they're going to be mad at you. So, there was a cultural normalization that this is not something that the woman I was talking to, this is not something that we like, but this is something our mothers have gone through, and we know that it's likely, it's like very likely that it's going to happen to us. One thing that I found very fascinating was, especially as women's empowerment increased, there tended to be an association with an increased level of violence. And I think this is, from my perception, where masculinity was conceived as kind of an impenetrability that was negotiated by intensifying, by heightening one status by diminishing another, by, if I can raise my status by knocking you down a few steps, then we're going to preserve this patriarchy. And so I noticed that happening as well. There was also a lot of victim blaming occurring. As I said, the make your bed hard mentality, there was victim blaming occurring also. I observed it in the criminal justice system in terms of, I witnessed court cases and listened to police officers and heard a lot of, well, they're gonna be back together tomorrow, so this protection order is a waste of time, that kind of thing. I think a lot of reason for that, from what I could tell, was that the criminal justice system, as many have mentioned, was overwhelmed. I mean, there were limited resources. At the time that I was conducting this research, there were four officers trained in domestic violence in the Cayo district. I know today that's more. I know all the police officers get training with revised policies, but still they were very overwhelmed, they were very stressed, and as I've mentioned, there's a police culture that is really perpetuating a lot of this victim blaming. Other things that contributed to a lack of reporting, maybe only an estimated 1% of cases would get reported, according to the women's department at the time. And I think that a lot of this has to do with, from what I could tell in my research, there was ethnic stereotyping. People would say, oh, well, this isn't really something that we do. This is a Maya problem. This is a Spanish problem. People would say things, and there was kind of people felt that by reporting they would bring shame upon themselves, upon their ethnicity. So that created some resistance to reporting. Gender expectations were also a big reason why people were hesitant to report. They were afraid to, they weren't conforming to what a man should do or what a woman should do. By reporting, certainly men would be extremely unlikely to report. And then distrust of the system in general. They felt that the police wouldn't take them seriously, that the police were, some of them were perpetrators themselves, that they would side with the perpetrators. So, and there were a number of contributing factors: alcoholism, joblessness, poverty, limited education, gender hierarchies. Those all contributed, but certainly by no means were necessary. I mean, the intimate partner violence was occurring across all ethnicities, all socioeconomic strata. It wasn't confined to any particular class or any particular group. It was very much across the board. And there were so many advocates across the Belize that I encountered that were doing work to resolve these issues, to work on these issues. And this work has been ongoing and spoken about so much today. But they didn't always agree on what was most important. Was it the economic concerns? Was it the health and safety? Was it the legal concerns? Is it a matter of transforming culture and norms? Is it all of those things? One thing I did find was that activists often would unite under a human rights framework. The idea of women's rights as human rights, and seeing that kind of as a rallying point for change. All right, so wrapping up here, I'm not sure exactly how my time looks, but okay. So the support group that initially formed with with the beginning of my research, it continues to me to this day. Women empowering each other has just, I've been amazed to witness what they've done. Even during the pandemic, they've provided educational and occupational assistance for women in abusive relationships. They've taken people into their homes with nothing but the shirt on their back. They've given them as much help and support as they possibly can. They've recognized the economic need to help people trying to leave relationships, and realizing that a large reason that they stay is because they don't feel that they have an economic alternative. The Mary Open Doors shelter, if anyone has an update today on how far they've come since 2016, I'd love to hear more about it. But at the time that I last visited, they had helped thousands of survivors from across Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Mexico. I mean, really, I just think that accomplished some amazing things. And Cayo, I just feel every time there's just this intangible intensity. It's just every time there's more and more push to keep the drive for all of this going. Back when I was working with Cornerstone Foundation, this was a mural that we painted outside the old Cornerstone, and I think the location might have changed since then. But in my most recent visit, I noticed this beautiful, massive mural, and I think it really speaks to women's empowerment. So the last bit I was just going to say here is, as my fellow panelists have called for, it's important to think about why we do the research and how we do the research. And I think one way that I would really offer as a helpful way to do research of this nature is by kind of combining that scholar activist perspective, by being both the researcher that can gather data that can be very useful for informing policy, but at the same time be that activist with your feet on the ground and out there and calling for change as well. Because I think it's impossible to study some things with so much gravity and not take a stance. Honestly, I think the melding it, taking the scholar activist perspective melds theoretical impartiality with ethical involvement. There's kind of been this mutual, exclusive type of mentality, I think, in academia, that you have to either be theoretically impartial or you're an activist, you're not so academic. But I think you can absolutely blend the two and bring in both of those sides. And this type of involvement is empowering for both researcher and stakeholders. And I think, it really focuses on that horizontal alignment where every voice is brought to the table rather than some sort of a top-down vertical alignment. It's very much in line with that decolonized approach that my fellow panelists have mentioned. And if you are curious in knowing more about this, this is my book that came out in 2016 that details my research. It looks more into the nuances of gender and ethnicity and the prevalence to contributing factors, economics, healthcare, education, the criminal justice system, and really focuses on the activist efforts across Belize, but especially in Cayo, to keep working towards creating a safer Belize. So, and it should be available at the Women's Department and hopefully in the public libraries in San Ignacio. Okay, and at Mary Open Doors. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much again for that wonderful presentation, and I like the fact that you linked it to your the persons that went prior. So you brought out some key points here in terms of the 50% prevalence rates of women that Women Department reported in terms of abuse, and that 1% of the cases are really reported. So I guess that is why the issue continues, and the fact that this male-dominated world, that the more awareness is brought, that the more males want to know, show their presence, and the abuse continues. So very, very key points. And it's alarming that you pointed out to us that Cayo district seems to have more abuse. And perhaps it's because it's the bigger district, because of maybe the influx of the persons from neighboring countries. We don't really know why, but very interesting research, and again, very timely. And we want to thank you for that very, very profound research as well. We're going to take general questions for the presenters who are still present here today, so that we can wrap up this session and move on to I believe, the last section. So we still have Dr. Bisky Dr. Kendra Flores Carter, Ms. Vigiri, with us, one of our presenters. Dr. Flores had to depart. So questions, comments for our three doctors present still. One on gang violence, one on the aspect of violence in the Kaya district, and continuing the progression of why women are being attacked and perpetrated, as even though there's more empowerment and awareness. So open the floor for questions from anyone here. Comments, questions to the presenters. I guess you all did an excellent job, so there's really no more questions.
I just want to ask
Go ahead, Ms. Caroline. Go ahead, sorry.
Dr. DeGary about the research on women in gangs. I think you said in this summer you'll be doing a more in-depth research. Will it be, because for this one you did, it's with 4 women, but they are women who are now not in the gangs, right? So will the one you do in summer, will that include those who are currently in the gang?
Great question. This summer's more expansive research will be all women in the gang, left the gang, at all different spots in their timeline within the gang. And it will be 15 women, young women, because of the qualitative research takes so long. It's 2 hours each session with each individual. So I end up spending 6 hours with each individual roughly. It depends how much of a talker they are. They can, do more time. So that's why it's quite smaller than some of the other research we talked about, but they will be in different spots in their gang involvement. I'll have active gang involvement as well as previously gang involved.
Okay, thank you. And also, did you was there any indication that the percentage of women in the gangs, is there a high percentage, or is there?
So the problem with it right now is we don't know anything specifically about the women, and this is just beginning to uncover that. So we don't know what percentage. It was inspired by me working with the girls at the youth hostel, and almost every single one of my clients reported that they were involved in a gang there.
Oh, okay, but it's because it's very interesting, and like you said, this is the first time I have worked with women in abusive relationships and young girls, but I never did think about those in the gangs. I knew that there were young girls in the gangs because I heard it from different people that I know, but I didn't realize that the reasons why they are also in the gangs, So I would really be interested in the follow-up research that you do. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you too.
All right, very good question, Mrs. Reynolds, Ms. Caroline. Any other questions for any of the presenters thus far?
Can I ask a question, Dr. McKay?
Go ahead, Dr. Macmillan.
I just wanted to check with Dr. Besky. Thanks for referring to some of the things I had mentioned about the relationship with the outsider, so to speak. But I wanted, because we mentioned about it being the incidence being maybe higher in the Cayo district. Well, actually, I am in San Ignacio right now, but I am wondering too, if maybe part of that is one, we have a very strong, how should I say, presence of Cornerstone. Cornerstone helps a lot, and the director is very approachable, extremely helpful. So I'm wondering if that relationship is one of the reasons why we are able to get more data. And then secondly, the fact that Mary Open Doors is one of the few safe houses we have, which would then mean that, okay, they will be able to share and direct us to some of the survivors or victims of domestic violence. And I think it would be interesting to look at those districts that, well, I don't know how many safe houses there are. I heard there actually might be only 3 in the country, but I don't know. but it would be good to find out too in those areas that we are not covering. And so just throwing that out, those could be things we can cooperate on. Like somebody mentioned earlier, alliances. So that's one of the alliances that we could, I would like to see explored. I am hoping that as a result of this conference, we could develop more alliances so we can learn more about the subject at hand. So thank you for that.
Yes, of course. And I agree with you. I think that a lot of it has to do with there being resources in that area. And so that is where the cases are getting reported. And even when the women's department initially had said in 2003, that's where they were getting the more cases per capita. Mary Open Doors hadn't opened yet, but Cornerstone still had a strong presence. So I think that absolutely, I think that that's a big reason why the reporting happens there. And the last safe houses that I had heard of were, well, the first one was Haven House in Belize City, and then Mary Open Doors in San Ignacio. And if there's another one that I don't know about, I would love. Does anyone? Do you know where the third one is?
Someone told me Corozal.
In Corozal.
Yes, it is in Corozal. I can't remember the name of it, but there is one in Corozal.
Excellent. That's great. That's great to hear. Yeah, but certainly, so the reporting numbers are not necessarily an indication of incidents, right? I mean, it just reporting is going to be higher in places where people feel empowered to report, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not being defensive of my hometown and my district, but I just wanted to put on record that maybe that is the reason why, right?
Absolutely.
It's not that we're so violent in the West, you know?
Right. No, absolutely. And I don't necessarily think the Cayo has the highest incidence at all. It's just the area that I happen to investigate because I was working there with archaeology and then kind of started to explore that region. But I think certainly it is underreported. So even the reported rates we have coming from any district are going to be only a small portion of that, of the full picture about how common the violence actually is.
Yes, true. Thank
I want
you.
to thank you all very, very much. We're kind of pressed for time, so we really need to get into the other session. So the last session for today, I know we're really over time, but I really want to thank you all for sticking with us. We just have one more session to go. And like I said, we probably need a 2-day event to really do this the proper way, for have all those questions everybody's asking. There's so many questions people really want answers to. I mean, it's amazing. Now, our last session, which will be panel 5, is going to be talking about bodies, beliefs, and behaviors. And our moderator is Dr. Kendra Flores Carter. Now, Dr. Kendra Flores Carter is a published author, a California Baptist University professor of social work, and a researcher in the social and behavioral sciences field, specifically women's and child health. An advocate for social justice and change, she has dedicated her career to bring educational awareness to disparities, equity, concerns in healthcare, experiences, and various other psychosocial issues affecting marginalized women and children. A former medical social worker for over 10 years, Dr. Flores Carter worked to provide services to children suffering from trauma related to child abuse, neglect, and women experiencing significant life crises such as intimate partner violence, substance abuse, complications, incarcerations, homelessness, and mental illness. Dr. Flores Carter is recognized both locally and internationally as an expert educator in women's and child health. Dr. Flores Carter holds a BA in psychology from California State University, an MSW from California State University, as well as a Doctor of Social Work degree from the University of Tennessee. I now present to you Dr. Kendra Flores Carter.
Hi, thank you so much. It's just so humbling when you hear your your bio read back to you, and I'm really excited to be here once again. Thank you for having me. I am honored to present our first speaker, Miss Verly Lam. I hope I said that correctly, and apologies if I didn't. She's a graduate student from North Caribbean University, and she will be talking to us about teen pregnancy and school dropout among adolescents in Belize. Early, Rebecca Lam is presently the Dean of the Discipline at Paul Bogle High School in Jamaica. She has a Bachelor's of Art degree in Guidance and Counseling from Jamaica Theological Seminary, where she graduated with honors. She is a graduate student in her final semester at Northern Caribbean University, where she's pursuing a master's degree in counseling psychology, marriage and family therapy. She is the graduate representative and vice president of the 2022 graduating class and the Northeast Region student representative for Jamaica Psychological Society. She has a passion for mental health, women, and children. Her research focuses on issues affecting women and children. So let's welcome Miss Verly Lam.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're able to hear me loud and clear.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. I will not be before you long because I am those type of speakers that just love pouring the information and then disappear. But greetings from Jamaica. It's been a while since I've been home, so I really do miss all the rice and beans and the panades and all of those good things. For those of you who have been here from this morning, thank you so much for sticking it out and waiting until the last set of presenters are completed or finished with their presentation. So in 2019, I did a study on teen pregnancy and school dropout among adolescent girls in Belize. And I wanted to find out, firstly, what were the main reasons why girls were dropping out of high school? And then I wanted to look at the cultural dynamics as it related to girls going back to school after teen pregnancy. What I do know and what we gathered in terms of data from Belize is that the multi-indicator cluster survey that was conducted in 2015 shows that the dropout rate of girls is at 51%. 21.1% of adolescents between the age of 15 to 18 years have given birth to one or more children. Now, I hope those statistics begin to ring a bell in your head, because you will know that between the age of 15 and 18, that is when girls are in their final 2 years or in their final year of high school. And so if our girls are dropping out of school during the 15 and 18 age gap, then that is a cry for great concern. And so the statistics also shows for Belize, according to the statistical analysis of women and children, that girls who come from a wealthy family or a family where parents attain higher education are more likely to complete their education. So it shows us then that when a girl child completes or finishes their educational career, then they have a better chance of ensuring that their children then receive their education. But at 15 to 18, when they're dropping out of school, it is a cry for concern that it might be a generation of young women who continue to struggle with sending their children to school. And so if girls continue to drop out of school and they are not provided with proper sexual and reproductive health information and services, then the statistic in Belize for teen pregnancy will continue to increase. 74 out of every 1,000 adolescents are pregnant in Belize between the age of 15 to 18. So for every 1,000 teen, 74 of them are pregnant. Now, under the laws of Belize, any teenager that becomes pregnant under the age of 16 is considered to be a victim of sexual abuse or commercial sexual exploitation. So that should send another alarm in our head then, that why is it that nothing is being done, or there is not a lot that is being done to account for that 15 to 18, the perpetrators of such crime. So I did a survey. I did surveys in schools. I did focus group with teenage mothers, focus group with parents, and I did some interviews with principals, school counselors, as well as nonprofit organizations and government officials. And from the research gathered, in terms of challenges that girls face in schools and why is it that they are dropping out, the study shows that 32% of those that were surveyed indicated that students that are girls that are pressured by their parents to stay at home or care for their siblings would drop out of school. So that whopping 32% shows that there is still a taboo. In my days, there was this thing that you do not send girls to school because you don't want them to disgrace the family, so they prefer to send the males. So that is still something that goes on in our society. Only 25% stated that the cost of education was the reason why girls would drop out of school. Teen pregnancy accounted for 29% according to those that were surveyed. Interviews with principals and counselors indicated that 100% of the respondents stated that teen pregnancy and economic issues are the main reason why girls drop out of school, primarily during third and fourth form. So you know that excitement of your daughter going to school in first form and second form, and then all of a sudden when they're almost at the end of the road, third and fourth form, principals and guidance counselor, they were saying that that was when they were dropping out of school, either because of economic situations or teen pregnancy. Now, I asked the question, what is one thing that would stop a girl from completing her education? 59% of respondents stated that teen pregnancy would be the one main reason why girls would drop out of school. Relationship choices was at 19%, while economic and finance was at 14%, illness was at 2%, and family stability was also at 2%, and peer pressure was at 4%. So the persons that were surveyed, which included parents and counselors and principals and all of that, they were saying that teen pregnancy was that reason. Another question that I wanted to find out, okay, girls are dropping out of school. Is it that we are not teaching them sexual reproductive health information? Is it not being provided? Are we talking to them about contraceptive? And so I asked the question, what do students know about contraceptive? Do they learn about it from school or from an adult? And students indicated that yes, 74% of them said, yes, we know what contraceptive is. And they were able to define what contraceptive is. But the issue was that 59% of them did not feel comfortable talking about sex or sexuality to an adult. So while they get their information from maybe mass media or from other peers, they were not talking to adults about sex and anything related to sex. And so I asked parents in the interview, why do you think that your child will not come to you and say, Mommy, I am having sex, what should I do? And they said, no, that is disrespectful, that is rude. You don't come to me with that kind of behavior and those kind of questions. And so there was a level of discomfort. And that could be why it is that girls are getting pregnant, because they are not taking care of themselves. They are going out there, they're having sex, but they're not using contraceptive because there is nobody out there that they could say, what do I do? How should I do this? So we know that the inability to discuss sex, from literature review, the inability to discuss sex and sexuality with an adult creates a gap between contraceptive knowledge and the use of it. And this is where it is important then that education and not just educating them, but ensuring that there is a place where they can share and express and voice their concerns and get the proper information is keenly important. From the interviews with teen mothers, 50% of teenage mothers interviewed had 2 children. And the gap from the first and the second pregnancy was not far apart from each other. I asked the question to mothers, if your daughter got pregnant while in high school and wanted to go back, would you support her? 84% of parents said, yes, of course I would. The remaining said that maybe or somewhat, because girls must feel, they must feel to learn. But yet they were not feeling, because if we go back, the 50% had 2 children. So they were not feeling and they were not learning because they were still going out there and they were getting pregnant again. Another question, should a girl who dropped out of school due to teen pregnancy be allowed to return back to the same school after giving birth? 65% said yes, they should be able to return back to school. Now, we might be familiar in Belize, there is not a lot of evening division school for girls. I know there is one in the Cayo district, there is one in Belmopan, there is 1 or 2 down the south, and I think there is about 2 or so in Belize City. So if girls are getting pregnant and they're dropping out of school and they want to return back to school, the question was, who is babysitting? Do you have support? And so there was a positive attitude according to the survey results in support for girls returning to school after giving birth. But girls themselves, those that were pregnant, those that had the children, said that they did not feel like they had the support from others, including their parents, to return back to school. There was no place to leave their child. There was no scholarship opportunities for them, because the idea of you must feel to learn was something that they heard often. I asked the question, does your community support girls' education by providing scholarship opportunities for girls? And 61% said no, 39% said yes. Some of the NGOs that I interviewed said that even though they did not provide scholarship opportunities, they provided other opportunities, such as counseling, they provided family intervention, how to raise your children, all of those were provided, but it was a scholarship. The economic means to go back to school was not there. I use the Broadfender theoretical framework in my research, because he believed that a person's development is affected by everything in his surroundings. And all the environmental factors play a tremendous role in respect to the support that girls receive when pursuing their education. And what happens at home, at school, or at play contributes to the overall percentage of girls who drop out of school. So it is not just the responsibility of the parents, but when they go to school, to teach them the proper sexual and reproductive health information, to give them the knowledge and the tools necessary for them to make the decision that would assist them on their journey to attaining education. Girls' education matters, because educated girls contribute to increased household income and savings, better family health, and improve opportunities for future generation. When you educate a girl child, that girl child would then turn around and make something of herself, and then she's able to help her siblings. School improvement requires focusing on the total environment, which includes the school board, central administrators, teachers, community, and parents, if it is that we're going to tackle the increase of teen pregnancy in Belize. Dropout rate for women is at a much higher rate than men, which suggests that marital responsibilities and childbearing had a stronger impact on dropout for young women. So when girls were expelled from school because they were pregnant, the boys that may have got them pregnant were still in school. Now, that is an issue that we must be able to look at, because if the goal of education for all is to be made a reality among all children of the world, then no child, not even a girl or a boy, anywhere in Belize is supposed to leave high school before completion or not allowed to return back due to teen pregnancy. And the reintegration policy is so vitally important that girls can be given the opportunity to return back to school even after they have a child. And creating a support system for them is also vitally important, because education is a must. And everyone has a part to play in ensuring that girls obtain their secondary education. To drop out of school at the age of 15 to 18 is a disadvantage for not only our girls, but for the entire country of Belize, because it's not one child. Many of the times, according to the research by the mixed study, it is 1 or 2 children that those who drop out of school is going to have. Now, this is an issue on our plate because this research, according to the mix, was in 2016, if not mistaken. We are now in 2022. And so I am wondering if the rate of teenage pregnancy would have increased or it would have been lowered based on the things that we would have been putting in place and the various activities that the government and other NGOs would have been carried out. It matters that girls are educated. It matters that they have the opportunity to return back to school after teen pregnancy. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Lam, for that really insightful presentation. Definitely much needed, your information that you provided. There's about 2 minutes for questioning. So is there any question in the audience? You can go ahead and unmute and ask your question. Miss Leolyn Castillo says she loves your passion. Very interesting. Does anyone have any question for Miss Lam? Okay, well, you can always type your question, and then if something comes to you towards the end, then we will go ahead and pose it at that time. But in the effort of moving forward, I would like to now bring up Dr. Aminata Mariesa. Please forgive me if I didn't say it right, but I tried. She is from Fordham University. And her presentation is titled "Saving Face, Losing Life, Obia, Pregnancy, and Reproductive Impropriety in Southern Belize." Dr. Aminata Mariesa is an adjunct professor at Fordham and New York University. She has a PhD in anthropology from NYU. Her research history and interests include medical anthropology, politics of reproduction, gender and development, exploration of transnationalism, and yoga with a regional concentration in Southern Belize. Her academic works include "In a Good Position for Birth, Pregnancy, Risk, and Development." Sorry, that was my alarm. Okay, I'm sorry, I just got lost. "Pregnancy, Risk, and Development in Southern Belize, Reproduction and Narrative of Experience." So this seems to be a publication, I believe. "And Woman to Woman, Addressing the Need for Doula-Assisted Childbirth." Amikole is a certified yoga instructor and has founded a nonprofit holistic health institute, Mango Meditation Healing Art Center in Punta Gorda, Belize. She has apprenticed 28 plus years in the Wise Woman herbal tradition and conducts herbal workshops and private consultations, and created an international line of handcrafted shea butter beauty products. Amikole currently serves as vice chair of the board at 6th Street Community Center on the Lower East Side, New York City, and is honorary director of grant sourcing for Rhythm of Change Belize. She is committed to education as a form of empowerment, cross-cultural exchange as means to global peace, and embodied therapeutic practices to inspire happiness. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Aminata Amikole Mariesa. Welcome. She here? Oh, here you are. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much. Okay, I muted myself. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So I'll be just giving you, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this presentation. I just do give you one vignette from much larger research that I conducted working with traditional birth attendants in Toledo in the Southern District of Belize. So I did my primary research in 2006 to 2008, updated all of the stats and whatnot 10 years later, so it's very long duration. And I continue to have a very long-standing informal as well as formal relationship with many of my original research participants. And I'm very active in the Toledo area. I wanted to give you a sort of well-rounded introduction to the varied things that I do beyond academia and beyond academia within PG. Very early on into my research in 2006, I'll never forget the morning that I sat with Patrona, and I use pseudonyms whenever I say anyone's name in this presentation. So it was only a few months in when she asked me if I'd heard of something called obia pregnancy. And for some context, Patrona is a Mopan-speaking Maya woman who received TBA, which means Traditional Birth Attendant Training, a US-based NGO in 2000. And in that training, she was in theory to work with the Ministry of Health to provide midwifery services for her remote village, which to this day remains without paved access to PG Town Hospital or to the recently constructed San Antonio Polyclinic. And her village is actually quite far away. It's about 3 hours on public transportation to this day. A few of the villages have gained paved road access, but not hers. At the time of our conversation, Patrona was in her 40s. She was unmarried and she did not have any children. And so despite her lack of personal experience with childbirth, she was deemed an ideal candidate for TBA training because she didn't have any constraints of a husband. She was allowed freedom of movement to attend to the pregnant women in her village. And I was interviewing her about her experiences as a TBA when she recounted to me the chilling phenomena known locally as obia pregnancy. And her quote is, and I will not try to improvise her accent, but she said, for 9 months, a lady's belly gets bigger and bigger, but there's no baby. Her belly gets big because the man goes to a bush doctor to obia the lady. Maybe he gets vexed because she doesn't want to have sex with him. So the man makes the bush doctor obia her. Then blood comes out from between her legs and she dies. Before this conversation, I had always understood bush doctors to be healing practitioners who utilized plant-based medicine and assisted during labor and delivery. In 2006, and things have changed in the last 10 or 15 or so years, but at that time, most women in the rural villages of Toledo birthed at home with the assistance of close kin and called a bush doctor in case there were any complications. Hospital accessibility was and still is adversely affected by bad weather, road conditions, and lack of transportation. Other barriers to hospital birth included, and to some extent do still include, women's expressed shame about exposing their genitals to a non-family member during birth, as well as a very real fear of cesarean section. Historically, and to this day, obia, just for some context, and its practitioners has been associated with the Caribbean and the African diaspora with counter-hegemonic activities like slave rebellion, while also typified as a superstitious cultural practice that is inferior to scientific European rationality. In southern Belize, a number of obia practicing Maya bush doctors have been incorporated into the world of rational biomedical care as certified nurses aides or CNAs by the Ministry of Health's public health outreach campaigns. And primary health care is based on community participation. So the integration of individuals like bush doctors who are already positioned as community-based healthcare providers is very much so a great adaptation to the international objective of community participation. And arguably the local attraction to bush doctors as Ministry of Health service providers is their ability to then span both worlds. And in Patrona's village, the CNA was also the bush doctor. So that morning, my conversation with Patrona was interrupted mid-story as she had to get the only bus that was returning back to her village from PG Town. And we agreed to continue our talk a few days later when she would come back into town. However, this conversation never happened because the day after I had this talk with her, she was admitted to the hospital for an emergency C-section. No one knew that she had been 9 months pregnant. When Petrona went into labor, she suffered from placenta previa, where the placenta is covering the cervical opening, and the low-lying placenta had detached, caused her massive bleeding, and the death of her fetus. Petrona was likewise, when I learned of this, on the brink of death. Petrona's story is quite harrowing and may sound extreme, but the risks that she took to conceal her pregnancy, the rationale with which she justified her actions, and the shame she experienced around her condition are not anomalous. So despite Belize being landlocked in Central America, it is historically connected to English colonialism, right? The Queen is on the money, and Victorian morality. The surrounding Spanish colonial legacy is very apparent in the strength of the Catholic Church. Government institutions only began to dispense birth control in 2012, and abortion is illegal. Despite the high rate of teenage pregnancy, which we've just learned about, and female-headed households countrywide, the cultural ideal remains rooted in the conjugal relationship whereby unwed pregnancy is highly scrutinized, and acts of purportedly pregnancy-related suicide are common. So far as I know, there is no statistical evidence that can accurately tally the number of women who die from drinking herbicide in an attempt to off a pregnancy, or those who die from excessive bleeding after drinking bush medicine or an off-label prescription medication clandestinely provided by a medical doctor. But in 2006, when I was doing the bulk of my research, 2 young women in Toledo who were rumored to be pregnant died from ingesting poisonous substances. And according to those in Toledo and maybe elsewhere in the country, if that's not so, that's nearly so. So in this paper, my larger argument is that obia, which is dominantly portrayed as a counter-hegemonic force or irrational superstition or malevolent spiritual practice, can be agentively commanded by women to uphold normative representations of female sexuality and reproduction, even if it means they might die while trying to do so. So once my ears were open to this idea or this phenomena of obia pregnancy, I began to ask around and really had my ear out for where I could hear about these occurrences. And one was Trina. She was a Creole woman living in PG Town. She was 17 at the time. She was having sex with a 34-year-old married man. His wife had threatened Trina by saying that if she got pregnant, pregnancy would give you a lot of trouble because you messed with my husband knowing he was married. The wife of the husband then went to a bush doctor who OB'd the teenager to become pregnant with a stingray. According to Trina, the obstetrical ultrasound even confirmed that a stingray was inside of her, and the nursing staff said they could not help with the situation. When she began to experience intense abdominal pain, Trina sought the help of a bush doctor who gave her herbal medicine and recited some prayers to counter the initial obia of the angered wives. And this brought on her labor. She gave birth to a stingray. According to the bush doctor who told me this story, if Trina had not sought spiritual help, she would have stayed pregnant with the stingray past 9 months and eventually would have died. After hearing a number of stories about women impregnated with a variety of animals ranging from bats to toads, I tried to ascertain a medical opinion on the condition of obia pregnancy. And I spoke to a rural nurse midwife who offered the following explanation. He told me that an obia pregnancy was not a true pregnancy, but was usually a case of fibroid tumors that could distend the abdomen as they grew. Often by the time a woman would seek out a medical doctor to check the pregnancy, the fibroid would be too large to remedy without a total hysterectomy, which is an operation that is very difficult due to hospital distance, cultural miscommunication, finances, and if left untreated, the fibroid might rupture to cause bleeding or the death of the pregnant woman. Her death would then, and I'm saying she wasn't pregnant, right? She had fibroids, but her death would then confirm this power of obia. And the nurse said to me, well, I don't actually believe in obia, but there was one case, which was my grandmother. And he went on to recount the story of his grandmother's obia-induced pregnancy, during which time she birthed a rat, and then she died. In the archaeological records of 19th century African-American midwives, Lori Wilkie finds evidence that women were treated for, quote, frogs in the stomach, a euphemism for unwanted pregnancies. And according to Wilkie, quote, these animals share the condition of being associated with slime and dirt and mud, a metaphor for the moral pollution that the sufferer wants removed that seems to convey so strongly a woman's feelings of repulsion towards an unwanted invader. Similarly, Elisa Sobo's work on pregnancy loss and abortion tradition in Jamaica makes note of women who seek spiritual healers to remedy a, quote, unnatural pregnancy that was believed to be, quote, set upon women by jealous or wishful neighbors or by those to whom they have offended. So not human in form, these, quote, witchcraft babies often took the shape of lizards, cow heads, and other disgusting things, and that women desiring an abortion can decide that a frog and not a fetus occupies her belly, ethnomedically sanctioning her desire to wash out the contents of her uterus. So Nursey calls two interpretations of obia pregnancy, one biomedical and the other cultural, also exemplify how local forms of knowledge permeate and at times supersede biomedical understandings of health and illness. And so as a nurse and also a Maya man, Nursey calls admitted belief in his grandmother's obia pregnancy helps to illuminate the darkness surrounding the consequences of stratified reproduction in Toledo, where for some women, obia pregnancy offers a culturally permissible explanation for socially stigmatized sexual behaviors that can only be remedied through clandestine abortion. So unlike African-American midwives, Nursey Call makes no mention of obia pregnancy being used to mask these practices, but this type of silence may unwittingly perpetuate the stigma surrounding premarital sexual liaisons and illegal abortion. So Wilkie writes, it is hard to know whether sufferers believe they are literally invaded with animals or if these are metaphors. And likewise, even after Petrona undeniably underwent surgery to remove a dead human fetus from her womb, she continued to proclaim, and I believe she believed, that her virginity was compromised by obia. Petrona later ended up coming to my house after her hospitalization. She stayed with me for some time. She said she was ashamed to go back home to her mother, who would find out that she had been pregnant. And while she was with me, it took her some time to start to talk. It was an awkward moment for a while there. And at one point, she just exclaimed to me, it was obia. And she believed that Mr. Santiago, who was the bush doctor and also the community nurse's aide, with whom she was to work closely as the traditional birth attendant in her village, had refused to, had been making sexual advances to her that she refused. And when she made those refusals, he stopped working with her. He stopped informing her of the mobile clinic schedule. He stopped sharing supplies with her. And ultimately, Petrona believed that Mr. Santiago tried to shame her in the eyes of the community by impregnating her through obia. An additional facet to this story is that Petrona had received her training to be the traditional birth attendant from a foreign NGO and not from the Ministry of Health. Nurse Lee, who was the head of the maternal child health program at PG Hospital and the direct supervisor of the TBAs in Toledo, was extremely angry, as you could imagine, finding out that a TBA had become pregnant. And she was become pregnant and not sought out prenatal care, and then nearly resulted in a maternal death, which would have been a very adverse statistic for Toledo and for the country as a whole. And so Nurse Lee, interestingly, somewhat absolved Petrona only by extending blame to her foreign and thus what she believed was inadequate TBA training, as opposed to the TBAs that she had trained. She was very clear that she had her TBAs that she had trained, and then there were these TBAs that had been trained by an organization from the US. So in conclusion, like women under 19th century US slavery or in contemporary Jamaica, allegations of obia pregnancy for Petrona disguised or rendered invisible her socially unacceptable reproductive state. What makes her case unique is that she is a TBA who in theory had been trained to uphold and follow the maternal and child health protocols implemented by the Belizean Ministry of Health, but who in practice adhered to a stronger set of cultural imperatives that nearly killed her. And in a culture where adulterous jealousies, patriarchal anger, or gendered sexual impropriety spawn fetuses construed as rats or stingrays, masking the products of an unwanted pregnancy under the guise of obia may be a way for women and the larger social world to conceal reproductive practices that, despite their ubiquity, carry a greater shame and stigma if openly acknowledged. So whether one believes in the power of obia or accepts the cultural conditioning that tacitly sanctions problematic sexual encounters, social recognition of obia pregnancy influences women's reproductive decisions, and some of these decisions may end in their own death or that of their babies. And with this belief, results in clandestine behaviors. And just as a note, safe abortion remains illegal and therefore unobtainable. And so obiate pregnancy provides one way for women to conceal what is considered a socially inappropriate pregnancy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. Very, very insightful presentation. I have a question about the connection, I guess, to postpartum psychosis or even psychosis during pregnancy. So did you ever do any studies related to that, any of your literature review around psychosis?
Are you suggesting that obiate pregnancy being a kind of psychosis, or I'm not understanding the connection?
Well, I think the belief system that you mentioned, that she really did believe she was pregnant with something foreign, right? Is there like a connection to psychosis there?
Understood. I would say that in my conversations with Patrona, this was a coping mechanism for her to not admit to having sex, and a way for her to save her reputation. Obiate pregnancy, when I spoke to anyone outside of this instance with Patrona, said an obiate pregnancy is not a human fetus. So what makes Patrona unable to, based on the cultural logic of obiate pregnancy, unable to actually claim an obiate pregnancy, is that she had a human fetus that was inside of her. She had a stillbirth, right? And so her baby or her fetus was dead. So her holding on to the obiate pregnancy is actually not a real obiate pregnancy, because a real obiate pregnancy would be a stingray or a rat or a bat, or the woman would just die and one would never know, and one could say, see, she was obiate, she died. But because the trope is available to her, she could hold on to that. And whether one calls it a psychosis or, you know, some kind of postpartum delusion, it was a coping mechanism. I would definitely say that was available to her.
Yeah.
But she is the only person that I ever heard of, you know, who had a human fetus. And so the literature, it's a frog, it's a rat, it's a stingray, it's a something else. It's also a way to, you know, talking about high schoolers, if high school girls are expelled very often from school, it's not that they're leaving willingly, they are expelled from school if they're pregnant. And returning to school, they can't return to the same school, right? They return to a night school if there's one available, and there is one in PG to a night school. And Patrona was not a teenager, she was in her 40s. So in that respect is almost shameful on that other end of like, what, you're too old to get pregnant. Do you know what I mean? So there's kind of shame on both ends of that reproductive spectrum. But the fact that obiate pregnancy was available to her to say it wasn't my fault and to absolve herself of shame.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. Are there any questions for Dr. Marissa? Very interesting study. Anyone in the audience? Anyone wants to unmute and ask a question? Thoughts, feedback? I know we've been probably going a long time, so everyone's probably zoomed out by now, right? I'll hold the questions. If anything come later, we'll then,
Thank you so much.
Take questions. Thank you. I appreciate it, and quite an interesting study. Thank you so much for that. Okay, we will finally move on to our final presenter for today, who is Miss Melanie Smith, and I'm really honored to have the opportunity to introduce her. Melanie C. Smith is a PhD candidate at Dalhousie University. Her presentation will be entitled Child Minding and Caring in Belizean Transnational Household. Melanie C. Smith is a Belizean sociologist and a PhD candidate at Dalhousie University in Canada. She is a lecturer at the University of Belize, Faculty of Management and Social Scientists. Melanie has worked as a consultant in the areas of gender, migration, and international development. Her research interest centers on issues affecting women, particularly their positions within the Belizean family and society, as well as their participation in the global labor market. Her current research focuses on transnational families. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Miss Melanie C. Smith.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kendra. I am going to try my best to be very short because I know that everyone has been, everyone who's still here have been waiting for this presentation. So I am going to just give an overview of what I've been doing. And as I said before, the topic is child minding and caring in Belizean households. And I want to, talk a bit about what is a transnational household. And basically, they are a special kind of household. It is a usual household where there's an interdependent circle of closely related persons who share a sense of duty and responsibility for each other. But from a sociological perspective, these members need not be co-residents. They don't need to live in the same space, right? And neither do they need to be linked to consanguinity or kinship. What holds them together, like I said, is that sense of duty and responsibility for each other. And in transnational, in households, you can have more than one generation and people can live in more than one little units, sometimes within the same compound, sometimes without. The transnational household is a special kind of household. It's very unique in the sense that the members, that migration is part of the family history for them. The absence and the presence, the comings and the goings are all part of the family histories that, that these households encounter. So another distinction with transnational households is that they tend to navigate the immigration laws of more than one countries. So what I'm doing is a multi-sited ethnographic fieldwork in Belize and the United States. And I'm using ethnographic fieldwork because it allows me to be there. And I'm using semi-structured interviews and taking migration history of the women in these households. And I'm doing this using snowball sampling. So the questions that have guided this research looks at how are Belizean women contributing to the care needs of the transnational household, what caregiving strategies they're using, and also what resources are they tapping into in order to meet the obligations and care needs that they have. I also looked a bit about how COVID has impacted, their resources and caregiving strategies. So what is child minding? Child minding is the practice of taking care of someone else's child. So it could either be within the same household or can be outsourced. But it's one of the practices that is most salient from the data so far. And what I've seen is that at some point in their migration, that the migrant member has made a childcare arrangement. Minding children of their sisters or neighbors is a common arrangement that is made among migrant women. And women are making all sorts of arrangements to ensure that somebody competent is taking care of their children while they're away. And these kind of arrangements are based on traditional kinship bonds, or they're based as well on reciprocal obligations. And it's done, we tend to say that the children who stay behind, but what I'm seeing is that these who left behind. But what I'm seeing is that most of these children in transnational households are not being left behind. In fact, they're staying behind because there's the intent that later they are going to join their parent or parents. But what I can say is that this practice is based on the principles of trust and reciprocity, right? From the women that I interviewed, it shows how those who are child minding, they go to great lengths to show that they're trustworthy people, that they're people that their sisters or neighbors can rely on. However, I did encounter one situation where one of the mothers, she was a returned migrant, and she explained to me that her children she had trusted this person to take care of her child was being taken advantage of and neglected. And she said, when I was gone, I trusted my children were being well cared for, but I realized that my children just existed. I take responsibility for how they turned out, and this mother reflects, I won't do it again. So child minding practices scenarios are not just cultural practices in Belizean transnational households. They represent a safety net for the migrant mother who can leave knowing that such resource is available to them. So what I'm seeing too is that care is being done in a number of ways. It's social care, such as child minding, it's emotional care, there's financial care, and people have a wide range of care networks that they are able to tap into. Because the care varies across the life course, different people according to age and so on would have different needs. And so the members in the transnational household ensure that these different needs are met across the life course. Sometimes it's remittances that they share back and forth, because we tend to believe remittance only come inward, but sometimes it goes outward as well. And sometimes it's just an emotional relationship that emotional connections that they share with each other, especially in immediate and routine needs. For example, one mother recounted how her daughter was experiencing near homelessness in the United States. And she said, I didn't have any money to send her. All I had was the power of prayer. And I trusted that God would open a door for them. And so other times the assistance they get is for protracted illnesses, long-term and sometimes long-term and routine needs, such as paying for education. All of these things constitute care for them, right? This is a way of showing care for each other. And sometimes the families have even surplus that they can assist people within the communities. There is, also evidence of offering and providing long-term and acute care for long-term and acute needs. For example, one of the households explained to me that she had left Belize to care for her ailing sister up until her sister's death. And so caring within transnational households is very successful when material and non-material resources can be expended despite geographical distance. I also see that it's successful when households are, have cultural systems such as care networks involving extended family and neighbors available to them. Care networks are strongly and widely available to the point where these households are often able to extend help to other community members as well. Another practice I'm seeing is the transnational grandmothering, and these grandmothers, most of them are able-bodied. They are there for their children. Sometimes they're there for the birth of their grandchildren. And of course, this is dependent on the migration status of the grandmother, meaning that they're able to travel because they have the requisite travel documents and immigration categories. And one of the things that I see with these grandmothers is that they take great care not to spoil their visa, right? Meaning that each time they join their children, they remain with them long enough to provide the care and support they need, but at the same time being very careful not to jeopardize their visa stipulations. And so while the level of involvement differs from one household to another, transnational grandmothers and grandmothering is a very dynamic and fulfilling role for these women. Migrant women can rely on their mothers to join them during childbirth or call upon them to help with the children during vacations, or simply pay for trips so they can be a constant and active part of their grandchildren's safety net. What I'm seeing as well is that women in transnational households play both instrumental and effective roles in providing care for each other despite geographical boundaries. But it's not uncommon to find that the women abroad are also working as caregivers themselves. So they work as wage caregivers in areas such as domestic work, service work, and they participate in what Arlie Hochschild called a global care chain. Viewed this way, we can see the migrant woman caring for children of the elderly, children or elderly in the US, while her own children are being cared for by another woman within her care network. And so the other thing that I'm seeing is that migration itself is a form of care in their understanding. They migrate, the migrant moves in order to maximize the household income and to safeguard the financial well-being of the household. Women are usually the ones encouraged to go because, as one of the return migrant explained to me, women make more money than men because care work pays better than factory work. And so if they get living jobs, for example, she's explaining, then you have no expenses and everything then is your profit. So not only is it a safety net, it provides women in undocumented status to remain in place. And that is precarious for them, but at the same time, that precarity places the household in a heightened state of alert, because they're not sure what to make of it in the long term. Another salient finding is that the women who migrate specifically for care work, and I met some of them who worked for 40 years, and they had returned to Belize without any insurance, without any pensions, without social security, especially if they resided all those years in undocumented status. And a couple of the return migrants that I interviewed, neither had major savings nor, but they were content to live in their modest home. They were able to purchase, and they felt that what they had in savings was made it stable enough for them to the point where they could hire their own caregivers. And so for them, the ability to care for themselves, still being able to afford a caregiver in their old age and maintain an independent and dignified quality of life, was a testament of that their migration was worth it. And again, like I mentioned, there is a lot of care networks that's occurring, that's mobilizing around. And I even found what I call what I'm calling the network brokers. And these are people who have friends in the US, relatives or people they know. And when one of their family member is moving, they would tend to utilize those care work networks, call people within their networks and try to broker relationships with them to help the family member find a job or settle in, find a place to stay, etc. Another thing I'm seeing here is the care circulation, and care circulation is, where people are in the Belizean household. The care circulation is widely practiced, and like in many Latin American, Caribbean families, it's not unusual for a household to have various generations so that people can take care of each other, right? And so families would move elders into their homes. They would send a grandchild to live with the grandparent, or they are going to practice the exchange of child minding, right? I mind your child, you mind my child, kind of thing. So I'm seeing this in the transnational households. And like I said, those who have the requisite documents can move back and forth between Belize and the US. In one example, two sisters, one resides in the US and one resides in Belize, and they have each other's children. So one sister is taking care of her sister's son in the US, and the other sister is taking care of her sister's son in Belize. And so this is what we see again, is that a lot of keeping company is part of the care strategies that are being used, where, for example, one mother who takes care of her grandchild in Belize, she's taking care of the grandchild with the intent that they will later migrate to meet her daughter in the US once she settles. So again, here you see the care circulation occurring, and it's not just about child minding or caring for bodies, but also reciprocal exchanges that occur on the daily, such as sharing resources, food, lending money in times of need, providing moral and emotional support in times of crisis. I also see small investments in businesses, several entrepreneurial activities that are supported by remittances. I witnessed households selling clothing and American consumer items for additional income. I noted home renovation projects being undertaken. In one case, being paid for by a sister who had lived in the US for 40 years and decided to finally come home, and decided that she needed her own space. So her sister gave give her permission to add a piece to her home. So of course, she's looking in the future to stay within that household unit to ensure that she has care in the future. And so what we're seeing is that Belizean women at home and abroad are recasting and reconfiguring care in many ways. They have found new ways to navigate these transnational spaces and continue to provide care and child minding. At the same time, and it cannot go unnoticed, that the reinforcement of the gender division of labor and the idea that women are the ones who are to be entrusted with care and child minding. While men and boys recast and reconfigure their activities in transnational households, they do so within the confines of their own traditional roles. Not only are we seeing women reinforcing their roles as the natural carers, there are also clear instances that women are confident that transnational caring and child minding must be done by them. As one participant said, I had to go take care of my sister. Her son couldn't do it because he's a boy. These accounts provide insights into how households meet care needs and how the demands placed on women and girls shape their everyday life and outlook. Gender, generation, and the life course come together to ensure the needs of youth and old alike are taken care of from birth to death. In Belizean transnational households, we can see the vital role women play in ensuring that everyone is given equal consideration for care and love, despite geographical distances. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go past time.
No, you just made it. So thank you for that. Are there any questions in the audience? Such a brilliant, brilliant presentation. Thank you so much. Let me see if we have a question. I don't see anything here. Very well done.
I have a question if I could.
Oh, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, sure. Thank you for that presentation. I'm curious if there were, if you found any discussion as to why women chose to either leave their children in Belize or chose to bring them with them. Was there anything about like leaving them in Belize because of cultural considerations, things that they would learn in Belize that they couldn't learn in the US, or that it was safer in Belize than in the US, or vice versa, that in the US there was better education or better, you know, something, if there was a reason why they would either leave or bring?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. In so far, the reasons have not been because of the resources or the quality of life. The reason has been merely practical. Women tend to believe that their children are better off staying behind and then joining them later when they settled. So this is a kind of arrangement that you're seeing, that the arrangement is temporary. They don't consider it's going to be long-term. And when it does happen long-term, it's because they're unable to meet the immigration requirements to have their children join them. But one of the families that I interviewed, the grandmother who has one of the youngest child, the child is a couple of years old, I think she's a toddler still, and the mother, she's waiting for her daughter to settle in the US, and then she's going to go, but she doesn't have a visa, and the strategy was that the child will stay behind so that when they get to the Mexican border, they can request for asylum, using the child as the bargaining tool, right? Bargaining chip, I would say. So the strategies are based on, for them, what's most practical. And what's most practical is how easy or hard it is going to be for the mother to settle in before the children can join them.
Thank you for that. Thank you. There are some comments in this research project is fascinating and thorough in scope. So much more hood. It says so much more hood. Sorry, I'm trying to read the rest. Can't see it. My computer is slow. So, but there are some excellent comments in the chat. So thank you. Great job. Thank you. I know there was a question for Miss Lamb that came up earlier. There was a question, so if we can really go back there really quickly, and this was from Miss Dr. Virginia Hampton. Is there a program or school for pregnant girls in Belize? So Miss Lamb, do you want to
Uh, um, there are not specific schools for pregnant girls, but there are evening programs. I know, for example, the Bemopon Baptist High School has an evening division where pregnant mothers and teenage girls are able to go there from 5 to 8, and they do CXCs, they do the same set of courses that students in the day division would do. I think it's the same for San Ignacio. There are about 2 in Belize City as well as about 2 down south. So once the girl is expelled from school or drop out of school pregnant, they can go to those schools and they're allowed to have classes.
Okay, are there any more questions for any of the presenters in this on this panel? If you can, go ahead and unmute and ask your questions. Great job, thank you. So everyone's saying great job. Excellent. Great work. Okay. Looks great.
Dr. Kendra, I noticed there's another question there. Do you believe that the pandemic caused an increase in teenage pregnancy and school dropout?
Oh.
I want to believe because of the enclosed and the being out of school for 2 years that this might be an issue that we're going to be seeing this year. I don't want to say certain, but using my counseling background, I'm presently doing a research study on the impact of COVID-19 on the mental health of children in Jamaica and Belize. And I am seeing a lot of issues arising there. However, teenage pregnancy is not one. I did see a report from UNICEF that indicated that abuse and violence and pregnancy might be risk factors, but I'm not certain and I don't want to say yes, but I am sure that there might be an increase there if we do study it and look at those measures.
Yeah, there might be trends for sure. It's definitely worth doing some research around. I think the pandemic, there's going to be a lot of pandemic babies for sure, because people were home more, you know, so girls that was, you know, home more, you know, if they, you know, women that was home more, you know, if they have a partner, I mean, there were more time for, you know, engaging in adult activities. And even if you're not an adult, there were more times to probably be engaging in sexual activities that would get you pregnant. So I would be very, very much interested to see what the trends are with pregnancy for teenagers. So that's definitely a good area to explore. Okay, I think that's it. So I definitely pass it back over to the host at the UWI campus here. So if you want to take it over, thank you so much for having me moderate, and thank you to the brilliant, outstanding, and excellent presentation by panel 5. So good work, guys. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Carter. And just like that, the conference has come to an end. And now to give the closing remarks is the Deputy Chief Education Officer in the Ministry of Education, Culture, Science, and Technology, Dr. Newlyn Winueva.
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues, our esteemed presenters, moderators, and participants. It is certainly my distinct honor to provide closure to such a historic and groundbreaking event. Belizean women crossing the margins, agency, contestations, and change. Wow, look at what we did. I'll tell you that this women's conference started out as an open discussion among a small group of Belizean women on a particular Wednesday night. Women who often, after a long day of work and all the multiple and competing demands on their time and energies, decided to create a space dedicated to connecting, dialoguing, and finding ways to support and advance women's leadership in Belize. These women are members of the Belize National Chapter of the Caribbean Women in Leadership, CWIL, a flagship networking organization committed to advancing transformational leadership and to increasing the numbers of women in leadership and decision-making in political and civic life in Caribbean countries. The mission of CWIL is to enable women to participate equally in leadership and decision-making in all spheres through strategies of advocacy, education, training and mentoring, dialogue and active listening, participatory action, solidarity, and partnership building, and conflict mediation and resolution. The Education, Research, and Development Subcommittee of the Belize National Chapter, in particular, supports the goal of CWIL by providing a platform for research studies focusing on Belizean women issues, giving greater visibility for pioneer and contemporary Belizean women and their achievements, maintaining a repository of research that have been conducted on Belizean women, and implementing a recognition system for women who have advanced women issues in Belize. We are very, very proud of the work of CWIL Belize in only its first year of operation and look forward to the road ahead. Of course, the women of CWIL Belize did not do this alone. There were many people working behind the scenes. We want to give credit to Mr. Rolando Cocom at Niche and Ms. April Martinez from the Belize Heritage Network for their assistance in identifying researchers working on topics related to Belizean women and girls. Dr. Yanira Oliveras Ortiz, who contributed her expertise in putting this virtual conference together. Dr. Kendra Flores Carter for providing review and editing support. Thank you. And we're also grateful to the Galen marketing team and Avant-Garde for their technical services. This conference would not be possible without the support of our National Chapter Chair and Head of the UWI Open Campus Belize, Dr. Charmaine Saunders, who readily volunteered to host the event as part of UWI Belize Open Campus events. To the administration and faculty of our national university, the University of Belize and Galen University, Dr. Vincent Palacio and Dr. Eve Aird, thank you for partnering with us. To each of our presenters and moderators, much gratitude is due. We're extremely grateful for your research, your time, and your enthusiasm in sharing your findings with us. Dr. Virginia Hampton, thank you in particular for setting the stage for us and continuing to engage throughout the conference. A big thank you, of course, to our Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Ian Cacho, who also did tremendous work behind the scenes helping to organize the conference. He did so side by side with our CWIL sister, Miss Melanie C. Smith, who, I'll let you know, going back to that fateful Wednesday night, had the courage to say, we can do this. We can do this well. And no, it will not take a year to pull off. And she did it. So as a result, today we got a chance to explore how we can shape our public, political, and cultural spaces to be more understanding and embracing of women. We have examined the barriers to and enablers of women leadership and faced violence, powerlessness, and agency and beliefs and ideas about our bodies head on. But more than that, the greatest lesson for today is that when we create safe spaces for women to dialogue, to take risks, to collaborate, when we have men who understand and support our need to take up that space, and when we put the greater good above individual differences, we all win. On behalf of the UWI Open Campus Belize, the University of Belize, Galen University, and CWIL Belize chapter, we want you to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you at our future events and as part of our advocacy for women leadership in Belize. Do enjoy the rest of your evening.